Dark Souls 1 is a great game, but God, has it not aged well? Yeah, and that's the big problem for me. If it was the first Souls-like I ever played, I'd probably be in love with it, you know? And I do have a lot of respect for it for being genre-defining, and I think generally being a pretty good game. It just wasn't enough for me. Because I have played later iterations of the same concept, like Elden Ring, like Sekiro, where From Software has learned and improved on their systems, and introduced a new one in Sekiro when it comes to how you're supposed to be parrying and playing a bit more aggressive rather than rolling and playing passively and reactively, and then playing Lies of P, which is Round 8 Studios' Souls-like, which I really enjoyed. Going from those more polished, more refined games to the original is definitely why I'm not as keen on the original and why it's harder for me to stick with it, you know, to Dark Souls 1. I understand this and I acknowledge that. For me, it wasn't worth the amount of time I was going to have to put in when I could just play Dark Souls 3 instead, you know? Oh, there's the Boeing shit that's been happening. That'd be interesting to talk about, I think. I did recently watch that John Oliver segment on it while playing Dark Souls 3, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, I finally started playing my first ever playthrough of Dark Souls 3. I still prefer Sekiro and Lies of P to it, but I'm having more fun than I was with the Dark Souls remastered, Dark Souls 1 remastered, so that's nice. My first ever Souls-like was Elden Ring, at least the first Souls-like I beat. And then from there, I played Sekiro, and that's my favorite Souls-like. Then I played Lies of P, which is oscillating between my favorite and second favorite with Sekiro. I have to replay Sekiro to really know. It'll likely be Sekiro afterward, but Lies of P is good as fuck for my kind of Souls-like gameplay. Much more reliance on parrying, deflections, and stuff like that, poise meter, rather than rolling, like in a lot of the Souls series in Elden Ring. Parrying with shields is boring and lame. I mean, like, perfect parrying with deflects, like in Sekiro. It's very poggers. I'm a big fan of that. I don't like rolling. I like just standing in place like a Chad and blocking every shot with a perfect parry. Parrying is so hard. For some people, yeah, not for me, though. It's my go-to. It's my preference. Which is why I like Sifu a lot, too. Because Sifu is very parry-oriented as well. Conure OP? I'm okay. I'm good with timing, surprisingly, considering how musically inclined I am. So parrying requires a lot of timing. So does dodge rolling. But parrying is way more timing sensitive. But the recovery after you've parried is a lot less than dodge rolling. So it feels more active for me. It feels like I'm more actively engaged. Whereas in like Dark Souls or even Elden Ring, like, I'm, like, dodge rolling, and then I have to wait for the animation to finish to finally be able to swing my fucking weapon. And it's just a bit slower, and it feels more like I'm reacting rather than directly engaging. Because, like, with Sekiro and Lies of P, I can be really fucking aggro on a boss, and just, like, sit there and deflect the blows they're trying to hit me with, and, like, attack immediately afterward. That feels really good. Whereas, like, dodge rolling, it just feels like there's more waiting involved. Especially because in, like, Elden Ring and Dark Souls, dodge rolling is really, like, the only way to play defensively. Like, you could use a shield or block with a weapon, but that shit sucks. Like, in Elden Ring, you can jump to avoid certain attacks, which is cool. So that was a nice addition. But in Dark Souls 3, like, your only option really is to dodge roll. And I don't like being limited in defensive options like that, because it makes the game feel very one-note. For me, rolling is way too forgiving. I like the feeling of deflecting a blow that would one-shot me with perfect timing. Yeah, same. That's also a big thing for me. I feel a lot more accomplished and skilled when, like, deflecting and parrying. And reason being is because, like you say, it's a higher risk for more reward, where, like, the window for a perfect parry in Lies of P is, like, drastically smaller, so more difficult to achieve than it is in Sekiro. But the risk reward is insane in that game for perfect parries, because you build up posture damage so that eventually you can get a critical when you build it up fully and they stagger. You also build up weapon damage on their weapon if they have a weapon that you can break, because not only can your weapons be broken and you have to sharpen it mid-fight, but you can also break enemy weapons if they have a weapon that can break, which is a lot of them. A lot of bosses, too, which is really cool and a fun new way to play. And I've talked about this before, like, one of the cool things about that for me is that if you're having, so say there's a boss that has a weapon, and you're having difficulty in phase 2 against that weapon, if you can break it, you can spend phase 1, like, whittling away at their weapon durability, break the weapon, and then suddenly that weapon is not as effective in phase 2, and maybe you do better then, right? Like, that's a way you could be like, okay, I'm losing a lot to phase 2. Maybe I would have a better shot at it if the weapon was broken, because I can break their weapon. I've noticed that. It's a cool new way to, like, recontextualize a fight and approach it in a different way to problem solve, right? Whereas in Dark Souls, the only way you can really do that is, like, changing your weapon, or that's really it. And, you know, it's just cool to have more defensive options, especially. Like in Lies of P and Sekiro, you can dodge, but you can also perfect parry. And dodging is easier, but perfect parrying is higher risk for more reward. And even in Elden Ring, like, you can jump, which is really cool. But, like, the parrying is not as good because you need, like, a shield for it that has the parry weapon art or whatever. So it's not as good. I don't like using those. That's why I like it a lot more. So if FromSoft was to come out with another Souls-like that uses the Sekiro, you know, mechanics set, I would be elated. It doesn't have to be Sekiro 2, but just one that uses that combat system, I would be so happy. I'm also very excited for what Round 8 Studios, who developed Lies of P, their next installment. I believe it's going to be a Souls-like. I'm excited for what that's going to be, because they improved upon the genre a lot, in my opinion, for hack and slash Souls-likes, like the Souls games and whatnot. So I don't know. That was a big problem that I had with Dark Souls 1, as I was playing the remastered, because like I say, Elden Ring was my first Souls-like, then I played Sekiro, then I played Lies of P, then I tried Dark Souls 1 remastered, and goddamn does it feel like shit. I can understand that, like, it was the first, right, of the Souls-like series, and, like, it was genre-defining, and if it was the only one to play, I can understand people, especially at the time, or even in hindsight with nostalgia, really being invested in the game and having a lot of respect for it. I have respect for it, too, because of that, even if I didn't enjoy playing it. The reason why I didn't enjoy playing it is that it feels very clunky. Like, the worlds and the enemies look cool, but the gameplay itself just feels very slow and clunky. And, like, I think that Elden Ring's combat is kind of slow a little bit sometimes, because it's focused mostly around dodge rolling. So, like, something that is going to be not as polished as Elden Ring, because I've got my criticisms of Elden Ring as well. It is just not, I could not, like, I got through what people always say is, like, the best part of Dark Souls 1, and I was like, okay, and I didn't know that at first. Like, what really took me out was that fucking butterfly boss, where you, like, literally have to either use a range weapon, which sucks, or just wait for it to get into your melee range, and just essentially play Toho for a little bit and dodge all its projectiles. That shit sucked, and it was like, okay, dude. And before that, it was, like, the twin gargoyles, where, like, I'm fine with it being like a DPS check to see if you can get the one gargoyle low enough and then kill it fast enough after the second one has spawned and joined the fight. But once both are on the field, like, they don't really work with each other in terms of their AI in a way that is, like, makes logical sense to me, at least. And it just becomes like a crapshoot of if I'm ever going to be able to do anything about it. So, like, it just turns into, like, the way you beat this boss is by bursting it down. And that's not that interesting to me. I would like to be able to, like, I like the challenge of gank fights. Like, I'm weird as fuck, okay? I thought that the Godskin duo was a fun fight. That might have been because the Godskin Apostle was my favorite boss on my first playthrough. But, like, I enjoyed that fight, even if it wasn't that great in terms of how the AI works and how they interact with each other. But it's even worse in the double gargoyle fight. In Elden Ring, there's even a double gargoyle fight later on. I think it's an optional boss. I think it's underground, in one of the underground areas, I think. Where it's the same thing, where you're fighting just one gargoyle guy, and then you get him low enough, or you take enough time, I don't know which is the trigger, and then the other one spawns, and you have to fight both. And the idea, obviously, is you can hopefully get the first one low enough, and then beat it before you have to fight the second one with it. Or you just fight the second one with it. And, this is a thing that FromSoft has been criticized for a lot, which is gank fights. I think they can be fun. And in fact, I think Lies of P does gank fights, not perfectly, because it's really hard to do in a very precise, like, combat-driven game, mechanically, like, precise game, like a Souls-like, but they actually do it kind of well. For the first iteration of it, there's another gank fight later that's, like, a remix of the first one, and I don't think that one's as good. But in the first one, there's the main big guy, and you're fighting him for a while, and then I think you either get him low enough, or you spend enough, I think you get him low enough health, and then one of the other people on his team jump in with him, and he kind of takes a back seat. So, like, you'll be fighting this other character that just came in and they don't have as much HP, they don't do as much damage, but if you're trying to fight both of them at once, it's a problem. If you focus the little guy and then kind of ignore the other one, you're going to do a lot better usually, because then you want to defeat the one that spawned and then go back to the main guy. And there's 3 of those total secondary characters that join in, but they only join in once the other one has died, right? It's not like a 4v1, it's a 2v1. But even then, the big guy that you're initially fighting, the only time he really attacks you at that point, when another guy, when one of the little ones jumps in, is a single attack. It's from a distance where he charges at you and then swings the weapon. And you can hear him do it. If you can't see him, you can hear him and be like, oh shit, I gotta be ready to dodge this or parry it or whatever. And there's enough of a tell non-visually that you're able to deal with the thing if you understand the fight, if you put enough time into understanding it. And I think it works really well. It can be annoying, especially if you're not exactly sure how you should approach the fight, but it's not as bad as the double gargoyles. And like I say, this is a critique of the first Dark Souls that came out, and even From Software has agreed with a lot of my criticisms because they've made it better in like Elden Ring and even Dark Souls 3, as I'm now experiencing, now that I'm playing Dark Souls 3 for the first time. So it's good that they've improved upon it. I'm just kind of like trying to describe what I don't like about Dark Souls 1 and why I didn't end up finishing it. Did you ever play God Hand? No, I have not. Won't be too long until we get a Lego Souls-like, calling it now. I mean, I'd play it. Dark Souls 1 is a great game, but God, has it not aged well? Yeah, and that's the big problem for me. If it was the first Souls-like I ever played, I'd probably be in love with it, you know? And I do have a lot of respect for it for being genre-defining. And I think generally being a pretty good game. It just wasn't enough for me. Because I have played later iterations of the same concept, like Elden Ring, like Sekiro, where From Software has learned and improved on their systems, and introduced a new one in Sekiro when it comes to how you're supposed to be parrying and playing a bit more aggressive rather than rolling and playing passively and reactively, and then playing Lies of P, which is Round 8 Studios' Souls-like, which I really enjoyed. Going from those more polished, more refined games to the original is definitely why I'm not as keen on the original and why it's harder for me to stick with it, to Dark Souls 1. I understand this and I acknowledge this. For me, it wasn't worth the amount of time I was going to have to put in when I could just play Dark Souls 3 instead, Which is a shame, because I wanted to beat Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2 is like kind of worse than Dark Souls 1, I hear, unfortunately, in some ways. But I would theoretically like to play all of them. It's just that right now anyway, I can't care enough. Maybe after I've played Dark Souls 3, beaten it, and then, let it simmer for a little bit, I'll be more familiar with the Souls-like series, like the Souls series, because I know Elden Ring deviates a bit with it being open world and also adding a jump button and, even horse riding, which, I never fight on a horse unless I feel like I have to. If I get more familiar with it, maybe I could go back to 1 after 3 and, give it another shot. But this is why I like playing series from earlier to latest entries. Yeah, same. Unfortunate. Have you tried the Demon Souls remake? No. It's not only on PS5. It's not an exclusivo. But yeah. I do want to play other Souls-likes. I know the Neo games are Souls-likey. Not, exactly, but they're in the vein. They're in the umbrella. I do want to try Code Vein, the Weeb Souls game, put out on Capcom or whatever. Or from Capcom, but not by From Software. I think that game, it's like a tag kind of game, like a 2v-E, 2-player game, but you have an NPC with you or something, which kind of puts me off of it a little bit, but I don't think fighting on a horse has ever been fun in any game. Yeah, it's just difficult to make it fun. And I should say, by the way, for my critiques of Elden Ring or the Dark Souls games or whatever, I don't use consumables. I don't use spells. I usually prefer strength builds. So I'll have a big weapon and I'll just be dodge rolling and, getting hits in. So if I was to use spells or incantations, or if I was to use shields even, because I don't use shields either, except in Dark Souls 1 you have to. But I don't use shields or any consumables like weapon enhancements. I'm just not a big fan of having to manage those resources. So that could also change the way I'm engaging with Dark Souls 1 to such an extent that it's not, maybe just not for me. Having to use a shield, it is a necessity in that game to use a shield. Maybe that's also part of it. It's just not my preferred playstyle, which I know is the case. But even that is a little bit further away from what I would want, which is a shame. Oh yeah, I was saying also when I got far enough into Dark Souls 1, And I was like, okay, I've gotten far enough. Maybe, it starts to pop off a little bit later. Maybe the start is not as strong. And then I was talking about it, and people who already played it were like, no, that was the good part. And I was like, oh. And that kind of solidified my not wanting to, see it through, unfortunately. Thank you very much for the raid. I hope you had a good stream. Boosh. I'm just currently talking about Souls-likes and my critiques of them, because I recently started my first ever playthrough of Dark Souls 3. My first Souls-like was Elden Ring, and I beat that. Then it was Sekiro, which is my favorite Souls-like. Then it was Lies of P, which is tied for my favorite Souls-like with Sekiro. I've played and beat Lies of P 3 times, once on New Game Plus. I will do it a 4th time. I have 2 achievements yet to get. I fucked up in my 3rd playthrough. I was trying to get them all in that one. Whoops. It is a good game, though, so I'm down to do a 4th. But I do need to replay Sekiro before then and beat it a 2nd time, and also get a different ending, because I got the Sword Saint ending. But I fucking love Sekiro and Lies of P. Because I like parrying. I don't like dodge rolling. And because Dark Souls 3 and even Elden Ring are based entirely almost around your defensive option is dodge rolling, they're just not as interesting to me. Elden Ring was a bit better because you could jump as well, but I like parrying, perfect parries and stuff like that. Have you played Bloodborne? Unfortunately not. It's a PS4 exclusive. I already would have played it if it was on PC. Have you heard of Lies of P? No. What is that? Is that a porn game? It's honestly worth buying a PS4 for it? That's what I hear. Did you know you can use a curved sword in your left-handed DS1? You can even parry with it? Really? Well, I mean, maybe next time I play it, I'll try some other shit like that. But it won't stop me from disliking other elements of the game, unfortunately. But luckily, From Software improved upon a lot of my criticisms in the later installments, even like Dark Souls 3, which I'm playing now. So, like, I'm excited to go back into Dark Souls 3 after stream tonight and play it again. Whereas when I was playing Dark Souls 1 Remastered, it was more like, okay, time to do this again, Which is a shame, but like I say, if it was the first Souls like I ever played, that would not be the case. I'd probably be over the moon about it. But I just kind of cucked myself by playing later From Software installments first, where they improved upon a lot of the shit.